Next up, Joy, listening in Fort Dodge, Iowa. Hi, Joy.
Hello.
Good to have you on the broadcast.
Well, I don't often get to catch it, but I did happen to catch it this time and decided to call in because been having some struggles for, I guess to give you a little history behind my question. I was a single mom. My late husband was hit by a car and passed away and when my youngest was 4 years old. And I recently was remarried. I'm having a little bit of a struggle. I was a single mom for a really long time and had some serious domestic violence issues and things like that in between him passing and me getting married again. But my question is, I know the Bible talks about a woman being submissive to her husband and the man needing to be the spiritual leader of the household. And I'm struggling with that. I am also a pastor's kid, and I think that sometimes my husband doesn't feel up to the task of being the spiritual head of the household, which then it's hard for me to be submissive when, I don't know how to exactly explain the question. I don't know what to do in order to help him, uplift him to being that spiritual leader of the household, being a blended family, and having to have been the spiritual leader of the household, being a single mom for so long. What does the Bible say about situations like that?
Sure.
Or how do I handle that?
Yeah, well, just a couple of things that I think we need to get clear in discussing this issue to begin with, and that is, what does submission mean, and how does the Bible deal with the whole area of submission? Because we are often fixated on the notion that wives are to submit to their husbands as to the Lord. The text tells us that. And then, of course, there's a reason for that. Paul says, because for the husband is the head of the wife as Christ is the head of the church, his body. But what comes before that is the notion that we are to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So submission is always a two-way street. And it's important that we pour the right meaning into the word submission, because submit means to yield your own rights. It does not denote obedience. The word obey doesn't even appear in the Bible with regard to wives, only with respect to children in the context of the family structure. So submit to one another is the notion that husbands are called to give up their own rights, to love their wives very much as Christ loved the church. So we have to get clear on our minds what submission means and to recognize that this is a two-way street. We are called to give up our rights to one another, and then we can fully embrace what it means to love one another, not just as a feeling, but in terms of a deep and an abiding commitment to one another. And you have experienced now a marriage, and then in between the marriage, domestic abuse, and now another marriage. And I think that in your present context, you have to recognize that you have learned a lot through life's lessons, and they can be used in a very fruitful way, not only in the lives of your children, but in your interactions with your husband. So remember, it is a submission to one another, which ultimately means a giving up of your rights so that you're not lording it over one another, but learning from one another in meekness and in reverence.
Okay, so can you give me some clarification as far as giving up your rights? He's a younger Christian than I am, but he was a Christian before we got married. But as far as having the confidence in spiritual leadership, since I guess because I'm a pastor's kid and I've been a parent longer than he has, he doesn't have any children of his own, he kind of turns to me as far as being that leader, and I just feel like I need him to step up into that role, and I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, well, but there's something that you have to offer, and that's what I'm talking about when I talk about your life experience. His role is to love you because the exemplar is Jesus Christ, who loved the church and gave himself up for her. That's precisely the argument that Paul makes here in Ephesians chapter 5. So what Jesus Christ has done is the example for what he should do with respect to you. Love you, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for the church. That is how a husband is to love his wife. Husbands ought to love their wives, Paul says further, as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated his own body, but he feeds and cares for it just as Christ does the church. So Christ nurtures the church. In the same way, a husband is to nurture or cultivate his wife so that the very best gifts and talents that God has imbued her with are used within the context not only of the family structure, but the broader family of God as well.
Well, I think in that context, he does a lot of that. So I guess, I don't know, as far as being the spiritual head of the household, then maybe in my definition, I don't know, what is the definition of that?
Well, again, Christ is the head of the church, right? But how does Christ demonstrate his headship over the church? Does he do it by putting a thumb on us? No, he does it by cultivating us, by imbuing us with power, by living his life through us. And that's this whole idea that I was talking about with respect to submission to one another and true love, where you give up yourself for one another. You care for one another as better than yourself. But this in no way means that he has the corner on all truth. No, together you are a unity. God has brought you together for a purpose. You are complementing one another. If both of you are identical, one of you would be unnecessary. So God uses your combined talents now in a synergistic way. So it's not just 1 + 1, you and your husband, 1 + 1, but what happens is it's 1 × 1. In other words, your collective talents as a unity, as those who have been joined together in the bonds of love, is greater than anything you could do on your own. So you, the wife and the mother, have more knowledge, experience, and wisdom than your husband. So you need to bring your own gifts to bear in the relationship to raise a family. It's not as though now you abdicate your gift and experience. No, you have to use that gift and experience, and in the process do it with meekness and humility so that your husband can shine as well, so that his gifts are not suppressed but used as well. But in no way can you take your life experience and your growth spiritually and subjugate that. That's not what submission means. It means to give up your own rights for one another.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I definitely enjoy your show when I do get a chance to listen.
Thank you so much, Joy. Appreciate you calling. God bless you. We are out of time for this edition of the Bible Answer Man broadcast. As I close the broadcast, once again, our contact information via the mail, Box 8500, Charlotte, North Carolina, zip code 28271, via the web, equip.org, and the phone, 888-7000, and the letters CRI. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time with more of the Bible Answer Man broadcast.